So my name, by the way, is Peter Blood. I live on Pecumtuck and Nipmuc land, or Wôpanâak land in Western Massachusetts. And I'm from a group called the 400 Years Project, which is one of the groups that planned this program and is sponsoring it. It's an association of 25 faith congregations and peace and justice groups and educational groups in Western Massachusetts. This is difficult work that we're going to do tonight for many of us. I want to thank you for joining us and taking this journey with us to hear Indigenous voices about this holiday. Many of us that are taking part in activities at this point to confront colonization and systemic racism take time in our meetings to try and get into our bodies. I believe, and many believe, that no one would intentionally want to harm others deeply in the way that happens through colonization and racism. And so one of the things that happens is people who are put into that role are told and taught to get out of touch with their body. So I would like to invite all of you to take a moment to put your feet on the floor if that's comfortable for you, and to breathe and feel what's happening in this precious body that you've been given. Notice if there's fear, if there's anxiety, or if there's excitement, whatever's going on within your body. So why don't we just take a moment quietly to prepare ourselves in whatever way you wish for this time we're spending tonight. So if you hear things tonight that make you uncomfortable, I invite you to return, to notice your body, to notice that discomfort, and to live into it so we can all learn from each other and move towards healing and justice together. So Jen, our tech host tonight, is just going to say a few brief words of orientation.
Thank you, Peter. Hello, friends, and welcome. We're happy to have you here. My name is Jen Higgins Newman, and I am the program manager at Beacon Hill Friends House. We're a Quaker Center for Learning and Action and a residential community of about 20 people who live according to Quaker values in downtown Boston. So before we get further into tonight's program, I have some quick orienting remarks and housekeeping information, after which I'll hand things back to Peter. So at this time, as some have already done, I invite you to introduce yourself in the chat. So please list your name, where you're zooming in from, and the land that you live on. That is all I have for you this evening. Welcome, friends. We are happy to have you here. And Peter, I'm going to hand things back to you.
We acknowledge that all of us living in this region named New England by those who colonized it are living on the stolen homelands of the Wampanoag, Pequot, Nipmuc, Narragansett, Abenaki, Wabanaki, and many other Algonquian language-speaking peoples of the Northeast. Our homes, schools, and places of work and worship are built on colonized ground, appropriated through a series of actions intended to destroy, seize, or diminish Indigenous people, culture, and resources. We seek to live into these historical realities the impacts of settler colonialism and the ways that profit and harm still derive from these acts. We affirm the identities, languages, and cultures of the many Native peoples still living among us here today. We respectfully support the healing and restoration underway and yearn for genuine justice and peace in our time and for generations to come. I want to thank my friend Andy Grant for help in preparing that land acknowledgement tonight. And now we have our extraordinary opportunity to hear two Indigenous voices who've been willing to share with us their perspectives as Wampanoag on this time that has been called by some Thanksgiving. Our first presenter will be Joan Tavares Avant, often known as Granny Squannit. She's a Deer Clan mother of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe. Jen is going to play Joan's presentation from a pre-recorded video. Though Joan is here with us tonight on the phone, you want to say hi briefly, Joan, just to greet people? Can you do that?
Yes, I do. Yeah. Good evening, and I appreciate you wanting to listen and learn more about the colonization process and what has happened. So I appreciate it very much. And maybe later on, I will give you my email if you have any questions or comments. I'll be glad to hear from you. And thank you for coming. I thank you for joining in. Hello, good evening. I'm honored to be asked to be a part of this important presentation. My title is Every Day is Thanksgiving Day, starting with I woke up this morning. Thank you. Thanksgiving has not been transformed by truth. For many Mashpee Wampanoag people of the First Light and other tribal groups in Massachusetts regard Thanksgiving as a day of mourning. Too many outsiders who live here do not know why. We were never taught the truth in education teachings in our schools or church. Most were taught that the Pilgrims landed in 1620 and we all lived happily ever after. That's not true at all. Colonialism is a myth at its best as described. I am an educated elder now, and it hurts my Native American soul that I was taught the steadily untruth history. First official Thanksgiving was proclaimed in 1637 by Governor Winthrop. He did it to celebrate the safe return of men from Massachusetts Bay Colony who had gone to Connecticut to participate in the massacre of over 700 Pequot women, men, and children. Even worse, too many of our ancestors, mothers, fathers, grandmas, aunts, uncles, grandpas, chiefs, medicine men and women, and others endured the same lies and corruption of American history and went to their graves, not knowing the truth. Well, that's going to change for our next generations. We are teaching now and will for as long as we are on Mother Earth. History wants us to believe that the Indian was a savage, illiterate, uncivilized animal. A history that was written by an organized, disciplined people who expose us as an unorganized and undisciplined entity. Two distinctly different cultures met. We thought they must control life. The other believed life should be enjoyed because nature decreed it. Let us remember that the Indian is and was just as human as a white man. This is by Frank James Wampanoag, Wamsutta in 1970, a Thanksgiving speech in Plymouth, Mass. Thanksgiving Day is a reminder of the genocide of millions of Native people and the theft of Native lands and the relentless assault on Native culture. Participants in National Day of Mourning honor ancestors and the struggles of Native peoples to survive today. It is a day of remembrances and spiritual connection, as well as protection of racism and oppression, which Native Americans continue to experience. Storytelling and sharing can build self-esteem when they have purpose. Lois Hirschberg, a friend of mine, tells this story. I am of Jewish, I'm sorry, I cannot pronounce that correctly, Jewish descent, and celebrated Thanksgiving as a child with immediate family. My mom passed in 1991. The family, most of which traveled from St. Louis, wanted to get together at Thanksgiving, but we were not in the mood to prepare a feast. I was working in the Mashpee school system as a guidance counselor. Joan Avant and I became very good friends. I had learned that Thanksgiving was not the holiday for Native Americans as it was portrayed in the history books. Our celebrating Thanksgiving had changed over the years, with family in agreement. We hired Joan to cater with traditional Wampanoag food. We were at Dad's house in Quincy, and Joan lived in Mashpee. Joan's car broke down near Sagamore Bridge. We called Linda Coombs, a Quina Wampanoag, who also lived in Mashpee. She and her son Darius picked up Joan and her food stuff to Quincy. Joan made menus for each member of the family: homemade quahog chowder, baked beans, homemade codfish cakes, my dad's favorite. Dessert was baked acorn squash filled with Indian pudding and topped with vanilla ice cream. All was so delicious. Just what we needed to warm our souls. My son, Dr. Edward V. Avant, Standing Pipe, says, Thanksgiving is neither good or bad for me personally. It is a day of reflection and a time off from the daily work process. When I was asked what do I think about Thanksgiving, it is a double-edged sword. As I study the history of Thanksgiving and for the most of my life have not understood the need to put their proper perspective and the simple truth, I would simply ask folks to do a bit of research about our area celebrated by all. I have wondered why this has not been done to this very day in this vast country of ours. Understanding the past and its truthful history would go a long way in healing our very troubled past. I believe in studying the past with your anger, but a precise reckoning. I take heart to this year's election as it speaks to positive change we have been yearning for the past 4 years. The question in my heart is how will we achieve a reckoning for past grievances by our shared government? I am thankful for this day, having supported and defended our nation as a military member. I wish all day of peace. I wish all day of peace and reflection, and maybe, just maybe, a bit of research about our local area that now encompasses all of USA. Once the past is clearly understood, then actual progress can be made for us now. There are people who still believe that the Wampanoag met the Pilgrims and helped them through the first winter and later fell off the face of Mother Earth. Rarely it is mentioned that we were here about 12,000 years before any newcomers arrived. My ancestors were fishing and planting, making their own canoes and taking care of each other. There was no such thing as built malls. Their mall was Mother Earth, which provided all that was needed, including wild medicine. American Studies Center at UCLA in 1989 research says, just as the exploitation of American Indian land and resources is of value to corporate America, research and publishing is valuable to non-Indian scholars. As a result of racism, greed, and distorted perceptions of Native realities, Indian culture as an economic commodity has been exploited by the dominant society with considerable damage to Indian people. Tribal people need to safeguard the borders of their cultural domains against research and publishing, inclusions, and research on history and culture must consider Indian perspectives. I want to thank you all for listening to my interpretations about Thanksgiving, and to the ones that believe in Thanksgiving, I wish you peace and happiness. May the stars carry your sadness away. May the flowers fill your heart with beauty. May hope forever wipe away your tears. And above all, may silence make you strong. Native American wisdom. Amen.
Hello, hello? I don't think that I can hear nothing.
Joan, we're here. People are just taking
Okay.
in speech. Is there anything else you wanted to say?
Oh, no, not really at this time. I really want them to, listen to what I had to say. And, like I say, I am going to give my email out. I don't know when to do that. Maybe at the end of next presentation.
Thank you, Joan. So we're going to hear now from Gail Melix from the Wampanoag tribe.
Okay.
My name is Gail Melix. My Wampanoag roots lie in Manomet, a village of Plymouth, known to the Indigenous peoples as Pawtuxet, its original name. I am not a spokesperson for a tribe. I am also a Quaker from Sandwich Monthly Meeting. I live in Santuit, Mass, on Mashpee Wampanoag sacred homeland. I want to thank everyone who organized, planned, and participated in this program, and a warm welcome to all of you who are attending. It's an honor to be presenting alongside Joan Tavares Avant, Granny Squannit, who is joining us by phone, but we already know that. Like Joan Tavares Avant, I was taught in school the Pilgrim's myth of Thanksgiving and the history of this country minus the Indigenous experience. As a young adult, I was given a book that changed my life. It was called A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. This was the first time I'd ever seen the history of this country from the viewpoint of Indigenous peoples, and specifically my Wampanoag ancestors. I hesitate to use the word viewpoint because Wampanoag history is based on fact. It's not a point of view, it's a fact. I'd like to start with some truths about the origins of Thanksgiving. In 1621, the Wampanoags were not invited to a feast by the Pilgrims. That day, the Plymouth colonists were celebrating their first successful harvest by shooting cannons and muskets into the air. In response to the gunfire, 90 concerned Wampanoag warriors showed up to investigate, to make sure that their people weren't being taken or killed. After discovering that they were not attacking anyone, our men stayed around to make sure the English settled down and weren't really gearing up for a battle. Staying meant we needed to feed ourselves, so deer were hunted. The gathering took place over 3 days, sometime between late September and mid-November in 1621. Although there may have been some diplomacy, one can only imagine the grave uneasiness that was likely present between 90 warriors and the colonialists who were heavily armed. This was not the Thanksgiving portrayed by Pilgrim mythology. Another truth about Thanksgiving involves the massacre of over 700 Pequot children, women, and men. In 1637, Governor Winthrop proclaimed the first official day of Thanksgiving. He did so to celebrate the safe return of men from the Massachusetts Bay Colony who had gone to Mystic, Connecticut and murdered over 700 Pequot children, women, and men. In 1863, President Abraham Lincoln proclaimed Thanksgiving a national holiday. He did this to heal the huge rift between the North and South and to honor the beginning of a new country, the United States. So there are many things that don't resonate with natives about the origins and meaning of this holiday called Thanksgiving. Linda Coombs, a Quina Wampanoag and former associate director of the Wampanoag program at Plymouth Plantation, told the Christian Science Monitor, we as native people, traditionally, every time anybody went hunting or fishing or picked a plant, they would offer a prayer or acknowledgement. We as Native people have Thanksgiving as a daily ongoing thing. End of quote. I wanted to mention a fond childhood memory that I have that it reminded me of when I read this quote, and it's of collecting branches of holly and white pine to make wreaths. Would go way out in the woods with Dad and look for the pine and the holly with the nice berries. And I was taught to say thank you after every single branch was snipped. We were careful not to take too many from the same part of the tree. There was a sense of asking before you snipped. And some branches you didn't cut. You just knew not to. It felt good to say thank you repeatedly. Ramona Peters, elder in Bear Clan, a member of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, talks about Thanksgiving in this way. Wampanoags held Thanksgivings long before the Americanized holiday became common. We have 4 major Thanksgiving ceremonies for each season every year, and several smaller Thanksgivings together for greeting such things as strawberries, green corn, and spawning fish. Nothing in our ancestors' world was taken for granted. She also said, I'd like for those who teach the younger grades to focus more on the sentiment of being thankful. Gratitude is the most powerful Thanksgiving story from my perspective as a Wampanoag. Our country will benefit socially when young children grasp gratitude in a real way beyond ritual. Thanksgiving is a celebration of identity, which for some of us is as important as food itself. End of quote. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about the National Day of Mourning, which began in 1970 when Wamsutta Frank James, a Quina Wampanoag, was invited to address a gathering of dignitaries commemorating the 350th anniversary of the Pilgrims' Landing. Because his remarks were not what the Pilgrims' descendants wanted to hear, he was told he could not give his speech. He was told that one would be written for him. Instead of speaking to a group of dignitaries, Wamsutta Frank James went to Plymouth with a small group of Native Americans and declared U.S. Thanksgiving Day a national day of mourning for Indians. And he gave his suppressed speech there. I will include some quotes from this speech. The meaning behind the day of mourning is best understood in Wamsutta's words, not from someone trying to paraphrase it. The speech can be accessed on our resource page. So I'm just going to read a little bit from it. It's very moving. I speak to you as a man, a Wampanoag man. I am a proud man, proud of my ancestry, my accomplishments won by a strict parental direction. In quotes, you must succeed. Your face is a different color in this small Cape Cod community. I am a product of poverty and discrimination from these 2 social and economic diseases. It is with mixed emotion that I stand here to share my thoughts. This is a time of celebration for you, celebrating an anniversary of a beginning for the white man in America, a time of looking back, of reflection. But it was with a heavy heart that I look back upon what happened to my people. Even before the Pilgrims landed, it was common practice for explorers to capture Indians, take them to Europe, and sell them as slaves for 220 shillings apiece. The Pilgrims had hardly explored the shores of Cape Cod for 4 days before they had robbed the graves of my ancestors and stolen corn and beans. History gives us facts that there were atrocities, there were broken promises, and most of these centered around land ownership. Among ourselves, we understood that there were boundaries, but never before did we have to deal with fences and stone walls. But the white man had a need to prove his worth by the amount of land he owned. And only 10 years later, when the Puritans came, they treated the Wampanoag with even less kindness in converting the souls of so-called savages. Although the Puritans were harsh to members of their own society, the Indian was pressed between stone slabs and hanged as quickly as any other witch. And so, down through the years, there is a record after record of Indian lands taken and in token reservations set up for him to live on. The Indian, having been stripped of his power, could only stand by and watch while the white man took his land and used it for his personal gain. This was something that the Indian could not understand, for to him, land was survival, to farm, to hunt, to be enjoyed. It was not to be abused. We see incident after incident where the white man sought to tame the savage, convert him to the Christian ways of life. The early Pilgrim settlers led the Indian to believe that if he did not behave, they would dig up the ground and unleash the great epidemic again. Moonamum James, son of Wamsutta Frank James, continued this annual tradition, and during the National Day of Mourning in 1998, gave a speech that in many ways mirrored his father's. And I quote, "Every year since 1970, United American Indians of New England have organized the National Day of Mourning, the observance in Plymouth at noon on Thanksgiving Day. Every year, hundreds of Native people and our supporters from all 4 directions join us. Every year, including this year, Native people from throughout the Americas will speak the truth about our history and about current issues and struggles we are involved in. About the only true thing in the whole Pilgrim mythology is that these pitiful European strangers would not have survived their first several years in New England were it not for the aid of Wampanoag people. And what Native people got in return for this help was genocide, theft of our lands, never-ending repression, over 350 treaties that Native nations signed were broken by the US government. The myth of Thanksgiving, served up with dollops of European superiority and manifest destiny, just does not work for many people in this country. As Malcolm X once said about the African American experience in America, we did not land on Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock landed on us. This speech in full can also be read. This is very hard, by the way, this is very hard for me to read. I'm sure it's hard to hear some of it too. So I'd like to announce the 51st Annual National Day of Mourning, because it is the 51st, November 26th, 12 noon, Coles Hill, Plymouth, Mass. I've heard that this will be live streamed. Thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening.
And welcome back, friends. Just want to let you settle back with us. Let's take a minute. So I invite you now to enter any learnings or things that rose for your group in the chat. I just want to take a minute instead of having groups sort of share back, and I'll lift up a few out of the chat as I can. So I invite you to share what is rising for you if you had things that came up out of your group. The power of real conversation, understanding that we count, being honest with our children about it, learned about the first Quaker community in Sandwich and the relationship with the Wampanoag. Telling the truth is a way to start healing. The idea of a reconciliation ceremony, what would that look like? The importance of knowing the real history of the land that we own. The idea of publishing the speech given at the first day of mourning in the newspaper with info about how it was suppressed. Reminded to reconnect with the Seminole community here. We had a deep exploration around reparations, giving money to those who have been hurt and are not very poor can be helpful, but shouldn't be done as a way of avoiding building relationships and doing heart work. Spoke about how wonderful the Native American tradition of telling stories generation after generation and how shallow our personal family history seems by contrast. To get in touch with our own ancestry and their earth-based traditions. The lack of a connection to our own ancestral traditions that many of us as white people feel. Thanksgiving family traditions as a sort of sinister replacement for the ancestral traditions we exchanged for whiteness. Sharing big feelings and that this history is also part of our present day. Feeling that we have been brought together and hearing and sharing heart stories.
So thank you all for those reflections, and feel free to keep putting those in there as we move on. We're going to move on now from this very small attempt to hear and reflect and receive together the truth of what Wampanoag and other people throughout New England have experienced, and begin to explore how we can move forward as partners, as people in right relationship on a new road to Thanksgiving built on justice and right relationship. We hope that Joan is still with us. I know Gail is. And Kelly and Leslie represent strong decolonization workers in two faith communities in New England. They'll introduce themselves as they speak, and we'll have a conversation for about 20 minutes about how to move forward. And they will lift up some ideas which are partly in response to the wonderful questions you've been asking.
I'm Leslie Manning. I'm a member of the Religious Society of Friends, and my home meeting is Durham, Maine, which is on land that is homeland to the Wabanaki. Maine is a former colony of Massachusetts, and this year we are celebrating 200 years of statehood. My personal practice has been deeply shaped and influenced by the wisdom of Native traditions. And I am the former clerk or chair of the Reparations for Native Americans group under the care of New England Yearly Meeting. Part of what we heard when we were consulting with Native leaders and elders across New England was how important it is for us to apologize. New England Yearly Meeting has decided to offer an apology by living into the apology. It is not enough to say the pretty words, but to take this year to sit with and learn to live into what it means to apologize. I'd like to offer some thoughts based on what we've heard tonight about rethinking Thanksgiving. And I apologize for reading them, but I am hoping to capture what I have been given to say and hope that I remain faithful to that message. Thank you, friends. Thanksgiving, we have learned, is not a day. It is not a feast. It is a way of walking in the world. We have been given all that we need, not just to survive, but to thrive. We live, if we can but see it, in an abundance of resources that lend themselves to our well-being. We have been asked to steward and shepherd these resources so that they may be sustainable and sustain us all. Instead, we have chosen to exploit, enslave, exterminate, and extract. We have fished the cod to the point of collapse, stripped the earth and fracked the shale, fought wars over wood, petroleum, religion, and soon water. And whom do I mean by we? We, the descendants of the refugees, the economic refugees, the political and religious refugees who poured into this continent as victims of oppression and became the oppressors themselves. Because that is the nature of the domination system to which we, in our arrogance and ignorance, have subscribed for the last 5,000 years. Subjugate, assimilate, or exterminate, dominate. Now, again, we are being given another message, a timeless message, this time from the very people whom we sought to destroy in our own need for refuge, that it is not yet too late to reject the domination system and replace it with the system of shalom, of wholeness, peace, sufficiency, and healing, which brings the realm of the divine, the kingdom of God, into our daily lives. There is enough for all of us, enough grace, enough love, enough justice. As we listen to what has been shared tonight, will we fall into the pattern, the intention of honoring the messenger while ignoring the message? Will we do what has been done so often by well-intentioned people of our past and build altars and cults of personality rather than directly undertaking the work of forgiveness, healing, and building beloved community? This year, when this day of giving thanks will look and feel different for so many of us, This year holds the possibility of this day becoming a day of repentance, of turning away from and of turning forward, of acknowledging the harm we have caused and continue to cause the Indigenous people of this place, to seek to wrestle with what love requires of us in repairing the many injuries, including the moral injury of our domination, and to live with the unresolved grief that exists for so many of us. To say, I am sorry for what has been done and continues to be done in my name. To say, I will learn how to do better. To live in a spirit of humility and willingness to be teachable. To share what I have been given with others. To practice forgiveness of myself, of my ancestors, and of my people, and to hold each of us accountable for perpetuating ongoing harm and trauma. To live into this teaching from Maya Angelou. Do the best you can until you know better. Then, when you know better, do better. It is not mine to say what is better for Native people. It is for them to say and for me to listen, to take their words and their direction into my heart and proceed from there into action, witness, hope, and healing. May we give thanks.
Thank you, Leslie, so much for those words. My name is Kelly Gallagher, and I serve the Southern New England Conference of the United Church of Christ, staffing justice and witness with other colleagues there. And it's been an honor to be with all of you today. We had a wonderful conversation in our breakout room together, and to hear Joan's words and Gail's words and Leslie's words. I think what comes to me and what sits with me is the importance of learning, as Joan said, the need for research, the need to learn. And also, as I hear Gail and Leslie, the need to not only learn here, but to learn here in our hearts. I was saying in our small group that it is it's very, white people want to solve everything. And I just want to encourage what Leslie said, that we sit with something, that we listen to what we've heard, we feel it in our hearts, we question, how are we living still? in our DNA, when I say our as white people, in the DNA that brought us here as conquerors. The way that we think of things, even engaging in conversation, can we center the voice of others without seeking to contradict or to solve, or hearing in a way that is dominating. I mean, I just speak for myself. I've had to work very hard to understand how I hear in a dominating way. Like I listen and say, oh, I can do this. How can I respond? How can I solve this for you, Gail? How can I hear what you're saying that gives me something to do? And the practice and the process of learning to sit with the grief, as Leslie said, with the truth that Gail and Joan spoke, that in this moment, I think more than anything is a hard, hard work, but necessary before we can work together as colleagues with our Indigenous siblings. What I have learned in my very limited work, I feel like a lifetime isn't enough to work and hear from Indigenous communities, but more than anything, the desire to really be heard, and that it's hard for the dominant culture to really hear other. And so that's work that I want to encourage us to do. And as Leslie said, this Thanksgiving might be that moment without the cacophony of tradition to sit and hear. And I thank Gail and Joan for the gift of being able to listen tonight. I see someone mentioning the idea of dominant thinking or dominant culture, white supremacy. They're not understanding when I say dominant thinking, the idea of white supremacy that permeates our culture, that we live out of the doctrine of discovery, I believe Gail mentioned, the idea that we are destined, it is destiny to own the land and build the land and build on the land and run more roads and put pipelines and progress, or solve, or dominate. So I hope that helps. I've lost there. I hope that helps. This idea of, someone asked, what do you mean by dominant thinking? That's what I mean. And this is a conversation. Gail, Leslie, or Peter, if you want to jump in. You're muted, Gail.
I want to thank Kelly and Leslie for what they've said tonight. And one of the things that struck me first off is that I think it says a lot that so many of us are gathered here today to hear some of the Wampanoag story of what life was like after the Pilgrims landed on Turtle Island, willing to hear what the Pilgrims and some of their, other descendants have been unwilling to hear for 400 years. So this is huge, this willingness. And that gives me a lot of hope. And there was one thing I really did want to read this quote from a very wise Native American, tall oak, elder, historian, Pequot Wampanoag, because this really spoke to me. And it was during the time when the planning of the 2020 commemoration. And this is what he said. The 2020 commemoration, which is already in the planning stages on both sides of the Atlantic, definitely must not be an occasion of self-congratulations, but will have to be a time of deep introspection and reflection by the society that was transplanted here on Indian land. If this isn't understood, then we will be losing for all of our future generations the extremely vital teaching moment the Creator is giving us at these extremely troubled times we're living in. To me, that says an awful lot. And it might be part of a good place to start. And like both of you were saying, I think that the difference in knowing something and in believing it is the part where you take your knowledge down from your head into your heart, and you sit with those feelings, those very uncomfortable fear, anxiety, shame, guilt, all those things are going to come up. But if you don't, if you can't sit there with them, and sometimes it takes a long time, it's going to be really hard to go much further, because what we do is avoid those kind of uncomfortable feelings. We don't want to feel them, but it's part of the process in working forward to deciding what kind of justice you're going to be able to discern, what you're going to be able to do. You're not going to get to that point unless you can sit with that and work it out. And I think doing it in community is wonderful, a wonderful idea. Different faith communities can certainly take that on if they'd like.
I love what you said, Gail, about coming to a place of then being able to decide what we can do. And that if I can add that we're never done. That there's not, once we do something, we sit again. And coming to realize that we're just not done. If we're alive, there's work to be done. So thank you.
Joy in the work. Let's remember there's joy in the work. There's hope. There's all that positive stuff. It really happens. And the Creator is there for us. We'll get there.
Yeah.
We're not going to give up, are we? No, some of us are not going to give up. So there you have it. Oh, and Peter.
I think one of the most powerful things that I've heard from you, Gail, is the story of your own struggle and learning to sit with all of who you are. Could you, before you read your prayer this evening, share a little bit about that with all of us?
Okay. Is Peter going to speak first, or?
The only thing I'll say is this. There was a question earlier about what does domination culture mean? And Kelly partly responded to that, but I also wanted to respond in a personal way. I'm the descendant of many, many, many generations of colonizer peoples in New England. My ancestors first came here in the 17th century. And I didn't know those people myself. I don't know everything that they did and didn't do, but I do know that I was the son of 2 generations, at least, of oldest white males. And they had a sense that they needed to fix and control everything. They did a lot of good things in their lives. My father was a very active person for peace and justice and other good causes, but he was very, very controlling. And he had a very hard time sharing the mic, so to speak, the table with other people. And I've wrestled with that legacy for many, many years in my own journey. And I think part of dominant culture has to do with a sense of just believing that you have more right to control things, to fix things, to shape things than people who are from other genders, sexual orientations, races, faiths than our own. And this is deeply ingrained into our hearts, and it's deeply ingrained to how even this whole country relates to the rest of the world. And we have a long journey, many of us, to unlearn that and to begin practicing a different way. And I put in a minute ago a link called The Tenets of Accompaniment. And this came from the American Friends Service Committee. And it's a way of learning when you are relating to people from other backgrounds to learn to not be in that old culture. So if you are struggling with that as I have, you might want to have a look at that. I want to thank everybody for being with us tonight on this trip. I want to thank Gail especially for playing a huge role in pulling this event together. And
We
for
met
inviting
at Pagoda.
and the Peace Pagoda. That's where we met at the walk for the listening to the Great Spirit walk that the Peace Pagoda monks are taking. And I want to thank also Leslie and Kelly for bringing their voices to us tonight. And Jen, we could not have done this without your very, very hard work to give us a structure to carry this forward. So thank you to all of you. I just want to, before Gail has the last word, so to speak, to invite everyone to not stop this journey. This is just the tiniest baby step of this journey. Thank you for your questions. The questions that you sent in have been shared with the leaders. You may get some more answers from Joan or others from the things that you sent in at your registration. You can go to the interfaithamherst.org website and find a lot of information about the 400 Years Project, which is another thing that is definitely lifting up Indigenous voices. So thank you all. Continue the hard work together. And Gail, share with us what you were going to do to finish our time together.
Thank you. Yes, I just wanted to share that something that's been very difficult for me all of my life. My mother is a Mayflower descendant. And of course, I love my family. I love my great aunts, my grandmother, all the people on that side are wonderful. But for me to have to live I was a very sensitive child, to living and thinking about what that meant. And what did that mean about me? What did that mean about my truth? What was I supposed to do about this? And so I've wrestled with it for a long time, but then I began to see it as putting me in a position to process all my feelings and thoughts, and by doing that, to making myself do that. And it actually was something that helped me move me forward to want to take action for Indigenous justice. It was just part of my process, but it was difficult. I know I'm not responsible for what my forebears have done. It's up to me to be part of making that apology for that side of me, which I feel, I have done. But I think it's something going forward. I like to think that I might be somewhat helpful to others, where I do have the Wampanoag and the Quaker, that I might be helpful in helping other people to sort of work around that. I didn't tell anybody for the longest time. Now I'm being truthful. So let's see if we have, let me grab that beautiful prayer. Where did I hide it? Okay. This is a prayer from Leonard Peltier. and that most people know who that is. I can always pray, this can never be taken away from me. And through that prayer, I can keep the sun and hope alive. And so on this day, Thanksgiving, I will choose to be thankful and not to celebrate tyranny. I also want to pray with and for you. I pray for each and every one of you, whether you support me or you do not. I pray that your lives will be full of meaning. You will find new ways to learn. I pray for your strength and that you will always stand up for the things you know are right. I pray that each one of you will find a way to protect our Mother Earth. She is crying out for us to hear her. I pray that you will listen to your inner wisdom and that it guide you to make choices that will help each other and that will be examples for those still learning their way in this life. I pray that you will be present with the moments you have, enjoy the simple things in life, like the sun, the dirt, the air, the water, and that you would protect them as you would protect your own children. I pray that you will look for opportunities to lift up your brothers and sisters, not to bring them down. I pray that you will grow, enjoy good natural foods. I pray for you to savor the attention of your loved ones. I pray for you to build productive bridges of peace with those you oppose. I pray that when others make bad choices, you help them find positive solutions. I pray for understanding in times of misunderstanding. And yes, I pray very deeply and honestly that I can go home for a little while before I cross over to the spirit world. In the spirit of Crazy Horse, Leonard Peltier, Ma Takwiase, Lakota, we are all related.